Good afternoon and welcome to LGC Pulse. My name is Cynthia Loren. I'm the founder and lead strategist at LGC, Loren Gold Consulting. We are an Africa-focused consulting practice. We work with professional service organizations across Africa, supporting with marketing and business development initiatives. We are primarily focused on law firms, in-house legal teams, and accountancy practices. LGC Pulse is one of our initiatives, and the idea is that we are trying to provide a platform for senior marketing and BD professionals within international law firms who are responsible for Africa practices. We're inviting them to provide their insights, expertise, best practice on what it takes to grow, maintain, build a successful Africa practice. My guest this afternoon is Christine Kamunchuluh. Christine is the Senior Manager, Africa Development at DLA Piper, a role she's held since last August. So congratulations, you've done a year, Christine.
Fingers crossed.
Almost a year. Christine will talk a lot more about the role that she does shortly, but by way of a short introduction, Christine is responsible in this role for overseeing two key strategic programs which focus on integration and positioning, and which are aligned with DLA's vision of being a leading provider of legal services in Africa. Prior to her current role, Christine worked as a marketing and BD consultant at Stevenson Harwood, and she was also head of operations at the Africa Legal Network, ALN, an alliance of 14 member firms across Africa. And I'll be asking Christine in a minute to talk a little bit about that role as well. Interestingly, Christine began her career at Maersk, the shipping company, where she worked for 8 years in Kenya, London, and The Hague. Christine, a very warm welcome to LGC Pulse. Thank you so much for making time to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Thank you. Perhaps we can begin the interview, Christine, with you just telling us a little bit about the role that you currently do at DLA, and in particular, how that differs from the role that you were doing at ALN.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to me. I'll probably just start by saying this, Cynthia, for anyone who hasn't seen, I am originally from Kenya, and I'm very proud of that. Cynthia would have seen the flag in our office, which is something I take pride in. And I'll explain how that plays, what role that plays in my life. But just to answer Cynthia's question, I have been DLA for almost a year now. And I think whether I make it to a year or not depends on how well I do in this interview. My boss has been very clear on that, so I better be very careful what I say. Yes. I have two key mandates in my role, and that is to drive the integration process between the DLA Piper Africa firms, of which there are 18 of them, and DLA Piper International, which includes the two offices that are fully DLA owned in South Africa and Morocco. So I run initiatives, I have discussions, and I stakeholder manage processes and initiatives to make sure that as much as possible, we are aligning those firms to provide the same level of service and client offering. In addition to that, I also offer management support or operational support to our Africa member firms, the 18 that I mentioned. And that really is a mixed basket. People ask me what actually my role is, and it's not very easy to define it in one word, but I try to say, I like to say that it's a mix between being a management consultant, a project manager, and an operations manager, because that's really what I do. One day I'm working with a law firm in offering them advice on what they can do to improve their service levels and efficiency. The next minute, they told me to help them implement the initiative. So I'm a project manager, so I'm managing that project for them. And of course, that sort of feeds into overall operations of a law firm. So it's threefold, and that's what I really do. And that is also what I did at ALN, more or less. It's not very different in terms of the content. At ALN, even though we didn't have the international element of DLA Piper International, there was a clear objective and vision as much as possible to present our service offering as a one firm. So we had the one firm approach, which clearly shows the need for that approach in Africa, because two different firms have actually thought about the same concept and are implementing it in a different way, but objective is exactly the same. So I was very heavily involved in, leading the interactions and discussions between member firms to identify opportunities to work and resource our services together. And that again also involved providing some level of consultation to firms on what they could do to improve their service, what they needed to have in place to run and compete with the international firms who really are the biggest competitors to our national firms in Africa.
Interesting. So, I mean, given sort of the breadth of both those roles, but particularly what you're doing now, what would you say is the biggest challenge in being the one that has to try and bring together or integrate such diverse firms, personalities, etc.?
There are many challenges that come with a role like that, Cynthia. I could list a couple of pages, but with both organizations I'll use the word organizations very strategically here, having a similar structure in that there's no full integration. So all of them are independent law firms operating independently in their own right in their jurisdictions with very good reputation, very good standing, but also trying to achieve the same common objective, which is to provide a one-stop shop for clients who need that service in Africa. Mm-hmm. Then you sort of have to really balance what you're trying to do. So you can't really go and tell a firm what to do. You're not telling them how to run their firm. They are the partners, they are the owners, they know exactly what they want to do. All they need is some guidance and support. So that's very clear in both organizations. That's the approach, really. It's very consultative. There has to be an agreement. There has to be a buy-in from both parties, and no party is dominant to the other. So no party can tell the other party what to do. Mm-hmm. There has to be that buy-in. They have to see what the common objective is, and they have to be willing to work towards that. So that involves a lot of stakeholder management, a lot of selling the story behind it, selling the objective, and getting people to sing the same song with you and want to move in the same direction as you, which in very few words is really not easy.
And I imagine it's probably more challenging in an environment with like DLA, where you have many more jurisdictions that you're having to secure buy-in from. So I guess, in one, you're focused on one continent, but actually, although you're focused on DLA Africa, it's about securing the buy-in from all the international offices as well to achieve that goal. I mean, can you tell us a bit about sort of the DLA Africa story? Why the interest in Africa? What's the key objective? What are the key achievements so far, etc.?
Yeah, it's again not too dissimilar to ALN. Incidentally, actually, the two started about the same time. I mean, the ALN started around 2003, while DLA started around 2005. So you can see that the thinking came about the same time. Mm-hmm. And the reasoning was the same, in that clients started making inquiries about, a law firm that would provide a service across more than one jurisdiction. And so very quickly, the lawyers on the ground realized there was something here, because there were clients coming and saying, I have some work in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, and I would really like it if I could find someone who could, do the coordination for me, rather than me having to deal with 3 different countries, with 3 different approaches, 3 different languages, all different laws. So can you do that for me? And that's really how DLA was also born. And of course, over the years, DLA has existed in Africa with the relationship firms for 15 years, so since 2005, while DLA has, the international firm has been working in Africa for over 20 years. So there were people who were based in London and other jurisdictions, but doing work in Africa. But only in 2005 did they actually say, we want to form relationships with firms and start actually, having a clear understanding of what it is we are trying to do jointly and working together. And they have spent the last 15 years really building on the relationships, really strengthening that foundation, and not so much thinking about the structures behind it, but really the relationships. And I think that's really the strength in this, in that there's such strong relationships and such long history of them working together, that is now generic in what they do. And so the structures that we're introducing by this integration process is a natural next step to ensure that, we are staying ahead of the game. We are competing at the same level as the international firms working in Africa. And of course, we are also getting the best clients as a result of that structure.
Sorry, continue, go on.
Sorry, and I've just remembered I've not answered the question about why Africa is important to DLA. So DLA, as most of you would know, is a global service law firm and a legal service provider. And you can't really say you're global if you're not in Africa. I mean, that would be a lie. So we definitely do need that presence in Africa, and we don't want to just say we have presence in Africa through a loose network or a loose connection or just a relationship firm. We actually want to have the same presence, the same service provision as we would have in all other jurisdictions that we do have presence in across the world. So that's very important to us, that we say we're a global law firm and actually do live up to that and deliver the same service in Africa as we do elsewhere. But also, we're not on our own here. Everyone is interested in Africa. I mean, we still say, a lot of people still saying that Africa is the last frontier. Whether that's true or not, there is something about Africa. There's all the interesting projects, all the big deals are happening in Africa right now. So we cannot afford to not be there, just like all the other big businesses. So we want to be part of that story. We want to be part of the change. We want to be part of people who create that positive impact in Africa and develop with Africa as it changes.
I mean, that's in terms of, it's really interesting to hear the sort of the use of the word relationships and as opposed to offices, alliances, etc. I know when we have spoken before, you meant seems to be a sensitivity around networks. So I always describe this stuff as people setting up networks. And it's interesting that you said, you know, the part of the strategy is essentially ensuring that in the same way that DLA is present in other countries, it establishes presence across Africa. What would you say, just in relation to how you describe those relationships? Because I know you prefer not to be referred to as a firm, a networked firm. What do you refer to them as, and why is that? You know, what's the thinking behind that?
So the 18 Africa firms are legally organized in a Swiss Verein structure, which is the most popular structure in the professional services industry. And that's really the easiest way to do it from a legal perspective. And just because that doesn't involve financial integration, which in most jurisdictions will not be possible. And that also allows an agreement in place that ensures that both parties' needs are met and achieved. So it's very mutual in that respect. And so because of that, we try to not use the word network, because network implies as a dominant party in the relationship. And that's very sensitive from a DLA perspective, especially because it's very easy to think that DLA Piper International is a dominant party, but it's not. Every African DLA Piper Africa member firm has an agreement with DLA Piper International that is mutual to both of them and contains agreements that have been agreed as being beneficial to both parties. So that's very important to us. We could probably think about an alliance, because unlike a network, which means parties coming together with the intention of, you know, obtaining or attaining a common objective, an alliance goes further to share resources, which is what we are trying to do through the integration process, because we spend a lot of time in ensuring that, you know, we include our DLA Piper Africa firms in training, we pass on know-how, we work on deals together and upskill and improve the capability of our Africa firms, especially in areas that are not that well developed in Africa, and there will be areas like that. So alliance is a bit more amiable, but we still see ourselves as wanting to provide legal services as the biggest provider in Africa. So we won't be able to call ourselves a law firm just because there's very many legal restrictions. But to the extent possible, we want to be seen as one legal service provider across the continent, a Pan-African legal service provider.
Okay. And what would you say is DLA's greatest achievement so far from an Africa strategic perspective? I mean, I know you've been there a year, but so it can extend beyond the year that, I mean, I know you've done great things in the year that you've been there, but I mean, what would you say are the sort of the key milestones, the key achievements so far?
I mean, just starting by our presence, I mean, having a presence across 20 African countries is no mean feat. And as you say, that comes with its own challenges, but it's also our biggest advantage and our biggest differentiator. I mean, we do have networks that probably have a wider spread than we do, but then because of that element of not being fully integrated, we still have that edge because we're providing a more integrated service, a higher quality service, but across 20 African jurisdictions, which is, I think, unrivaled, if I can say that in this forum at the moment. But over and above that, as I said, it's not just about the numbers. It's not just about saying we're big and, you know, we're here as a global firm. It's really about imparting that knowledge, sharing of the resources, and, you know, working together with the Africa firms to ensure that they are operating at an international level. So that's very important to us. So that knowledge sharing, that upscaling, that going to hunt together and winning work together because of the competitive advantage that is brought to the table by having the global brand, which then gives the clients on the continent the confidence that they can do international work, but also our national understanding of the laws and the relationships we have on the continent, which is our unique offering as DLA Piper.
Okay. And in terms of so you've got 20 countries that you cover.
20 countries, yes.
Are there, talk us through the 20, and does that mean that they are priority jurisdictions, or is it more a case of sort of, through the natural course of things, these have emerged?
Oh, that's a tough one, Cynthia. I hope I can remember all of them, because, as I said, I'll be out of a job after this interview if I forget anyone. But I don't think I'll go through each of them. I'll probably just go on a region basis, because that's just easier. We have 54 countries in Africa, so there's no country that's the same. But there are very many similarities between the East, the West, the North, and the West. And so our strength lies really in the South and the East, where we have the biggest coverage. And that's naturally because of where and how it started. So Zambia, Kenya, Ghana, Egypt and South Africa and Tanzania were, I think, the pioneers, and we call them the legacy funds of DLA Piper Africa. So naturally then the spread continued in those regions. So in the East, we cover all the Eastern African countries, so we're very well covered. And as you know, there's a lot of interest in East Africa with, countries like Ethiopia growing so fast. Rwanda, the story of Rwanda is amazing. It just never stops to amaze me how much they do and what they're doing, including production in country. So definitely very, very keen on being very present there, being seen as a very strong brand in East Africa, because there's going to continue to be a lot of interest there. The South has always been very important, especially with South Africa previously being seen as one of the entry points into Africa, or gateway as they call it. And although they've had their challenges in the last 3 to 5 years with the mining industry and all the issues within the South, it's still quite an important region for us, and there's still a lot of good work coming out of South Africa, which we still want to be seen again as being the front line. We're not very strong in the West and Francophone Africa, and that will probably inform our strategy going forward, because again, well, we're lucky that we're in Nigeria, which is, of course, the most important economy, if I can say that again, in the West. But there's still, there's lots of interest in Ghana as a jurisdiction. So much going on there, so much potential, just because there's already so much in Nigeria that people have started outflowing into Ghana, and there's lots of opportunities coming out of there, including, in the oil and gas sector. So very keen to continue progressing there. But Francophone Africa, very interesting, especially with the OHADA laws. 19 countries operating with the same law, that's a gold mine. If you could get one really good law firm that can service, all the clients in OHADA, you don't have to have presence in all the 19 countries to service clients. And that's just a no-brainer for any firm that's looking to operate in that area. And with North as well, very strong links to Europe, continues to be very interesting. So all the jurisdictions are important to us. It will never be equal in terms of what you're getting. But again, just like every business in Africa, there are variations. Some regions do better than others, and some regions are affected by different economic factors. So it's very important for us to keep our footing in as many jurisdictions as possible. That said, we have no intention of ever having presence in all the 54 African countries. We're very clear that it will get to a point where we feel we are in all the key jurisdictions that will provide us with the workload that we need out of Africa. And that might be 25. We don't have a magic number. Right. But once we get there, then we will focus our efforts on continuing to strengthen our DLA Piper Africa brand in Africa, rather than continuing to grow for the sake of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's understood. And just, around the sort of gaps where you've mentioned that there are currently gaps or openings, this is something that has come up with a number of firms. I guess, the Francophone play is something that is a little trickier, but is also critical. And I know, many of your competitors are also looking at it. So I guess a question that would be associated with that is, in those particular jurisdictions where you are yet to have a presence, how does a firm make itself known to DLA Piper? How does one get on the radar? But also in jurisdictions where you already have a presence, would you look at other firms, or is it always going to be a case of we've already got an established presence? So two things, on the one hand, where there's none, how do you make yourself known to DLA, and where there's already something going on, does that mean that, you know, there's just no hope?
So to answer the first one, where we don't have presence, where we don't have a presence in the 18 countries, we do operate with best friends. Mm-hmm. And these are firms we have probably referred, worked over the years, mm-hmm. and have come to know how they work and the quality of their work. But for one reason or another, we haven't decided to form a relationship, either because it's not a priority jurisdiction, as you would say, for DLA at the moment, or it's in the pipeline, but not in the medium to short term. Or maybe we just never intend to go into that jurisdiction, in which case we'll continue that best friend relationship. Firms are more than welcome to, you know, get in touch with DLA and say they'd be interested, but we do look at the quality of the firm, the ranking of the firm in chambers, how they perform, the service delivery, because as I said, really the key or the epitome behind what you're trying to do is ensure that we are offering an international level of service on the continent. So it has to be a firm of good standing, well reputed, delivering good work, and of course, recognized by legal 500 chambers, for instance. Yeah. But in addition to that, it's not just about that. So we don't go for the top firm just because it's a top firm in a country. It's very important that there's that chemistry and there's that understanding and buying into our common objective, which goes back to the point about relationships. We would rather go for the number 2 in a country that understands what we are trying to do and is willing to work with us and walk the journey with us to achieve that common objective of hunting together, clients are getting together, and working on work in a fair and consistent way, than go for a top firm that would not gel in well with what we're trying to achieve. So we are very, very specific about that. And that's probably why we're not growing as fast as we should, because we're being very careful in who we select. And it takes a long time of us working with a best friend to then say, now we are ready to consider that firm as a DLA Piper Africa firm. But it's always good to know who's interested, and we're very open as to whether it would be a consideration or not. Okay. And to your second question, Cynthia, sorry, if you don't mind just repeating your second question.
No, so I guess, for example, in a jurisdiction like maybe Nigeria,
yes.
or in South Africa, where yes. you already have, you know, these strong connections, is there any hope for, you know, let's say, you know, a client, you know, because I talk to clients all the time, and this is the kind of thing they ask. So, you know, if you're already in a relationship with a firm, are you open to looking elsewhere, or how does that work?
We operate an exclusive membership per country, so one firm per country. And the reason behind that goes back to the quality. Because once we commit, then we commit everything. And, you know, the agreement we get into is to offer support, to work with that firm, and to create that differentiator in that country. So if we had more than one firm, that would completely be the purpose of us entering into that agreement. Mm-hmm. But that said, we have been around for very long, and there's a lot of changes happening on the continent. There's new entrants in the market every day. I mean, you probably have seen all the news last week about the new entrants in the Kenyan market. So no one knows what the future holds in any market. Yeah. And fingers have been burnt in the past. We've had a few cases where we've parted with the legacy partners because of differences in strategy and change in objectives, and which meant that the relationship wasn't towards a common purpose anymore. And in that case, then we have no choice but to go for either a new firm or even establish a firm in that jurisdiction ourselves. So for instance, in South Africa, we now have a DLA Piper owned firm, while for a very long time we were in a very close relationship with a big top South African firm. So these changes happen all the time, and you just can't call it. And when we get to that point, then you have to make the right decision for all the parties.
No, that's understood. Christine, what would you say are, you know, the key things that stand out to you about firms, or what are you looking for when you're interacting with firms? I know you've mentioned the relevance of, you know, what the legal publications say, the cultural fit, etc. But, you know, are there things that you sort of see, and particularly given your own background, having worked at ALN, you know, are there things that you see and you think, actually, this is great from a marketing perspective, these are the things that impress me, and then conversely, things that completely put you off?
Yeah, so I'll approach it from more from the operation side rather than the BD side, because that's what I spend most of my time doing. And really, Africa has so many opportunities right now to leapfrog and catch up with what's going on in the West. There's so many changes happening, for instance, in the IT industry that has made it so much easier for even smaller firms to access the latest technology and use that to improve their efficiency and be very innovative in how they offer client services. So what we're really looking for and what we want to be doing going forward, even with those existing firms, is being, the innovators and changing the game. It's not enough to say that this is Africa, so expect a lower standard, or you're going to Africa, so don't wait for an email response until 2 weeks later, because that's Africa. That narrative has to change. We cannot keep saying that, we cannot keep doing that, so it's unacceptable. So we and I particularly am very keen in working with firms that are very keen to innovate, to invest in people, because people are your greatest asset. So it's not enough to just hire the good lawyers out of university and let them wade through, their legal career and figure out where they're going. You have to invest in them, expose them, take them to trainings, invite them to webinars like this. And that's where really the value of DLA is, because there's so much at international level that we tap into for Africa firms that already exist without reinventing the wheel. It's also, as I said, looking at IT infrastructure, improving infrastructure. So lawyers work with very big files, papers on papers on papers, which is why I decided not to practice as a lawyer after qualification. But gone are the days where you have to toil through that to deliver client service. There's so many new products out there that help you to do this work fast and efficiently and very accurately, for that matter, to deliver clients the same service level that they're getting out of Europe, and also using your people resources in the most efficient way, which is to actually get them to do the thinking rather than the paperwork, which is long gone for lawyers. So innovation, infrastructure, investing in people, wanting to think differently, pushing the limits, and just thinking that the law firm is a business like any other. It's not just sitting there and toiling through papers and doing reading books just to say that I'm a lawyer, doing the law as it was done. It's a business. It has to be run efficiently, and the service has to be delivered at the same level as the international law firms are delivering.
I love that.
So very tough measures, but it is needed.
Very tough, but clear. And I love the fact, actually, I don't know whether you realized you were doing it, but you've done sort of 3 I's for us. Innovation, infrastructure, investment in people. So
there you go.
I think that's a great message to get across. It's interesting that you sort of talk about innovation, and I guess tied to that, are there hot sectors for you as a firm? I mean, there are some very obvious ones, and I guess tech would be one of them, but in looking at the market, and also I guess in looking at firms to partner with, what are you looking at from a sector perspective?
I mean, we have identified the key 3 hot sectors for us from an African perspective. And as you said, no surprise there, tech is one of them, just because there's so much opportunity in the tech sector in Africa. And more importantly, it's not really a space that's owned by any particular law firm or network or alliance at the moment. So it's a level playing field for everyone, and whoever gets there first and has the best tools will win. So let's all go for it. So that's definitely one we're keeping an eye on and very keen to be involved in. And traditionally, DLA Piper is very well known for its tech and IPT offering. So naturally, it makes sense for us to pass on that skill to our Africa firms as part of the integration process. Financial services is another one, again, almost obvious with all the fintech innovations happening. I mean, platforms like M-Pesa, which have been so successful across Africa. And so they sort of link in. Financial services and tech are not very far apart, so it makes sense to sort of concentrate on those 2 and build as much as you can across there. But again, banking, insurance, these are really key sectors for Africa. It's still very much the backbone of the basis of how we do business there. So that's definitely one for us. And we still believe in energy and natural resources as being still very important. And again, that sort of links into project and infrastructure. So we've seen all the work that's being undertaken by governments who are trying to reform their countries by building roads, railways, and all this infrastructure, all those projects. And the exciting thing is that these projects are very large scale and very big. So for a lawyer, it's very juicy work as well. It's not what you get in Europe. So it's very interesting, very easy to entice people to get involved in that work because it's interesting, it's raw, it's big, it's groundbreaking, which is what most lawyers are looking for. Mm-hmm. So that's really where we'll be focusing our efforts and energy.
Okay. And I mean, in terms of sort of, so we talk about sort of groundbreaking and exciting projects. Do you still see that as being the case now in light of the pandemic, or, has the outlook changed for you and the business in terms of what you see from Africa? Obviously, there was the McKinsey report or a number of reports that sort of said, it's all going south. It's all doom and gloom. I know lots of firms and in-house counsel that I work with have said, absolutely not. We're busy. I mean, things are tough. Yes, there is a pandemic, but actually there are still huge opportunities. So what is DLA's perspective on all of that?
So from a pandemic perspective, it's obviously affected everyone globally. And of course, there's a lot of speculation as to what would happen in Africa. And there's all doom and gloom, as you said, initially. But I think most African jurisdictions have proven otherwise, in that in as much as it's still too early to call, but it hasn't been as bad as it was predicted. And that's the hope that we are relying on, in that pandemic is a sort of a short disruption in time, but shouldn't really have the same economic effects as a financial crisis like the one we had in 2008, which of course continued and rippled over into Africa for a very long time. So we are hoping that because this is a pandemic, as soon as a vaccine or a cure, or we find a new way of living with this flu or virus, then the economies should be able to jump up, kickstart, and continue. And so we should continue seeing the projects, the big projects or the groundbreaking projects that were happening, continue or get back to where they stopped. So we're very hopeful in that. We have been affected differently across all our jurisdictions in Africa, typical, because there's so many differences and so many factors to consider. But what has been interesting is that even though I mentioned the three sectors we're focusing on, we have seen a lot of interest in some of the practice group offerings or sector offerings that we have at international level, also being very interesting in Africa. So, for instance, our employment practice has been extremely busy throughout this pandemic, because a lot of the issues that have come out have been about people. How do we make people redundant? How do we give them sabbaticals? How do we get them back to work safely? What do we do with people? Do we start working from home? So there's been all sorts of discussions around that. And we've had a lot of conversations with our clients, one-to-one virtual meetings, workshops, and it's been amazing. Tech and IPT has also been very interesting from a data protection perspective, how to deal with people, again, very linked to employment. And also one of the areas that we had started seeing getting an interest and sort of starting to take off, that's the word I'm looking for, to take off, was restructuring, which is not a very common practice in Africa, but again, very strong for us at DLA Piper International. But with this, you expect that a lot of firms will be looking at how to restructure, how to organize themselves post the pandemic, which assets they want to keep, including people and buildings, how to be cost effective, what to minimize. And so we've really, really taken advantage of those trends and made sure that we are, as much as possible, empowering our firms to be able to provide those services and talk to our clients about these opportunities that are coming up to balance our balance sheet. So in as much as the projects and maybe some of the corporate work like mergers and acquisitions have sort of slowed down, then we are generating revenue from these other areas. And that's the advantage of the diversity in your offering. So it has kept us going, and I believe that once we have a way forward with the pandemic, then we should be able to bring back the balance sheet to balance, or even just generate new revenues sources from the new work that we're starting to do.
Yeah. No, and I mean, it's interesting to hear sort of, the sectors that are picking up and the areas that are picking up. And it sounds like some of that has actually been a bit of a surprise, which is always, it's always nice, because it's not as if you're necessarily looking for it, but I guess as part of the sort of the presence that DLA has, you can leverage, the Africa play, and also generating work as part of that. So that's excellent. Is there any, what else is there about DLA that we don't know? What do you think you could share with us that we perhaps don't know about the firm and the work that you're doing?
I'll probably speak from experience on this one, having just been a DLA for 1 year. But when I was working in Nairobi with airline and, of course, in the legal space, I always used to think DLA was this big global animal that was coming to Africa and sort of not knowing really what they're doing and trying to take the work just because they're big and blue.
Yeah.
Big and blue associated together. I have been pleasantly surprised having worked there because, as I said, the models are very similar to what we're trying to achieve at ALN, which is, provide a leading legal service that is pan-African and is convenient for multinationals or clients with work across many jurisdictions in Africa. That's really the idea behind it. And through working with the national firms, we don't use the word local, through working with the national firms, it ensures that you're not taking away from the continent. So we are trying to build something together. And that is done through, as I said, mutual opportunities, working together, passing on experience and expertise, and giving our Africa firms that opportunity to stand on their own going forward. So if they work, for instance, on a very big PPP project between DLA Piper International and a national firm, then the experience obtained from that and the learning from that process is passed on. And the next time, the African firm is free to go and bid for similar work without necessarily involving DLA Piper international lawyers. So it's all about building the continent, being part of the change, positively impacting the economies in Africa to create that that positive change. And that's not really what I think most people think when they see a global firm operating on the continent. They always think, oh, they're coming to take our work, they're coming to steal our clients. It's really not that way. And the difference between our model, which I think is also interesting to highlight, is that we are very fair in how we split the revenue. So normally the traditional referral system is big magic circle firm gets the work, and there's one small piece that they can't actually do because it's very specific to a country. So they'll give you that 10-20% work and not even give you the context behind the work. That's traditionally how the referral system works. But with DLA, it's very clear. We go hunting together. We see the client together. We do the proposal together. So we know exactly how much the client is paying for. And when it comes to that discussion about how to split that, then there's a very clear understanding that it has to be beneficial. And our national firms don't just do the local or national legal work. They actually do as much as they can and only bring in the international firms where there is a need to do that. And that's why we have 18 happy members. Otherwise, we'll probably not have any. So it is a model that works, and it is all about positivity, growing together and developing the legal service, the legal industry together.
Yeah, no, fantastic, Christine. I mean, it's, that's always very encouraging to hear, just in terms of, particularly around things like pricing, because this is something that comes up time and time again. And, the idea of sort of hunting in packs and actually acting like a team. Given that you've been, and this is, I'm slightly throwing this at you, but given that you've been there a year, don't worry. Given that you've been there a year, and obviously you've achieved a significant amount even in the year that you've been there. What for you personally, is the goal over the next 12 months, let's say? And I guess part of that will be associated with navigating life post-pandemic, or but what for you is the big ambition over the next year or two?
For me, Lorraine, being in this role and my previous role at LGC, and even in Mask, I was very involved in doing work in Africa and with our Africa farms, and that's something that's very important to me. I like working with something to do with Africa because I want to be part of the change. I want to have an impact in everything I do. I actually, when I left Mask, before I joined DLA, I worked for a leading insurance company here in the UK that had nothing to do with anything outside of the UK. And oh my God, I couldn't believe it was just the wrong move for me. It just didn't resonate with me. I didn't have the connection. There was no chemistry. I just kept thinking, what's missing? What's missing here? So needless to say, I didn't last very long, which is how I ended up going back to Kenya with ALN. But it's very important for me to have that Africa-facing role because I'm African, very proudly Kenyan, and I want to be part of that generation that brings a positive change back to my home country and the continent at large. And that's reflected in the role that I take. So this, what I'm trying to do with integration, again, has that basis. But for me, the underlying driver, or what I really objective, is to change that narrative that this is Africa. I absolutely hate it when people say, what did you expect? This is Africa. Oh, that was a really good service for Africa. Oh, don't expect too much when you go to Africa. That absolutely irks me. And that's my mission in life, is to, as much as possible, with my little contribution, change that. So that's what I'm going to keep doing with the integration project. It's going to take me another 10 years probably to achieve full integration between 18 Africa funds and international. But if that's how long it takes, and it's equal and fair and changes that narrative for Africa, that's my commitment. But in terms of immediate next steps for the next year, what I've actually been involved in yet another project, which was not my key mandate, but we're calling it pole positioning, as you mentioned, and it's all about just looking at what we are doing with all our Africa farms and just making sure we have that pole positioning, which is a Formula One concept where the driver starts ahead of all the others to give them that advantage. So that's really going to be our focus. And even with COVID-19, we feel like this is still a very important thing for us to keep focusing on, given what I said, that we expect that this is not going to be long-term in terms of economic impact. We expect businesses to bounce back in the next 6 to 12 months. And so when we bounce back and business starts flowing back in Africa, we want to have emerged better than we were before COVID-19. So we still want to have that pole positioning. We want to be able now to service our clients with their new needs. We want to understand our clients better based on what will have changed for them during COVID and what they want us to deliver to them. So we'll be spending a lot of energy understanding that and making sure that we are, putting in everything we need to give us that pole positioning.
Excellent. I love the energy. You are definitely a kindred spirit. It is all about, raising the profile for Africa, supporting everything that happens there, and demonstrating just, the best practice and expertise that exists. Because like you, I also get equally frustrated when the expectation is this, it's Africa, so don't expect.
Yeah. I
actually think it's the total opposite. So it's great that you are, within the echelons of DLA achieving that. It's great. I've got 2 more questions for you, but before I get to those, I just want to check if people have, if anyone in the audience has any questions for Christine, please just put them in the chat function so that I can read them out before we come to the end of the session. Christine, one of the things that I read really interestingly in your biography is that you've been to, I think, 39 countries, have I got that right? And 60 cities. Amazing. I thought I was a traveler, but you've taken it to a whole nother level. So my first quick fire question is, if you could pick one favorite or most memorable destination in Africa specifically, which would it be? Exempting Kenya. We can't have Kenya.
How? Am I even allowed to do that? Well,
we know that Kenya is the default answer, but other than Kenya, go on.
I'll actually answer this in 2 parts. I'll break your rule, Lorraine, just because I'm all about pushing boundaries. So it's good that you restricted me to Africa, because it was definitely going to be an African destination. And I mean, there's so many beautiful places in Africa. And the obvious ones will be Cape Town, because you get everything. You get the mountain, you get the sea, and you get the wine. So why not? Who would not love that? But actually, for me, I think Madagascar, I went there on a business trip, and I managed to go and see the rainforest, was particularly beautiful and striking. It's quite different to what you get in sub-Saharan Africa. We have all the wildlife and everything, but there's something about it that's quite magical, and it's so serene and peaceful. I just fell in love with it. I didn't have enough time, obviously, because I was there on my own and on a work trip, but it's one of the places, if I had a chance to go back to and spend a week, I would definitely take that opportunity. But the winner for me still has to be Lamu in Kenya, a very, very small island, not known. Up until, I think, 2010, no cars were allowed. They used to use donkeys as a means of travel. So there's only one car that belonged to the chief. So you can imagine the cleanliness of the air and the conservation of nature in that area. There's a couple of really nice resorts, but it's not overcrowded. It's not a place where you go and find tourists completely covering up the beaches and, fighting for space. Serene, really good food. Everyone is polite. Everyone is friendly. It's just amazing. I mean, when I retire, I definitely will consider living in Lamu just to sort of get away from it all, and hopefully there'll be no network there as well, so I don't have to communicate with the outside world. So I hope I've answered your question in the
yes,
two.
No, definitely. That's great, thank you. And a final question from me. If you weren't doing this role, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be? What could you see yourself doing in another life?
Interesting. I know a lot of people say they'd want to be pilots, or they want to study medicine and be doctors. But it's funny because for me, even the law, once I studied law, I realized it's not something I enjoyed. It's not something I wanted to do for the rest of my life, which is why I never practiced. And it's important for me to do something that I have a passion for. And what I've always wanted or liked doing since I was a kid is just be a designer, a fashion designer. I just enjoyed putting things together and testing and trying with different things. I remember my mom would buy me clothes, and as soon as they were small, I'd go cut them into pieces and patch them up and make my own shorts with 2 different material, and it would look ridiculous, but I found it very interesting. And actually, Cynthia, when I was in The Hague, when I was still trying to think about what to do when I got married before I moved back to the UK and left Musk, I did try running my own boutique in Nairobi.
Wow.
And the whole idea was to see whether I would actually make it in this life as a designer and a boutique owner. And I stuck at it and managed to do it for 9 months, believe it or not, while still holding a day job. But the travel, the transportation became all too much, and it just wasn't feasible, especially with the cost. So I gave it up with the intention that maybe I'll revisit it one day. So who knows? If I don't keep this DLA job, I might go back to Nairobi and run a boutique and maybe start designing. African fashion is never boring for me at all.
Oh, I mean, so what was the name of the boutique?
London Fashion Style. Ironically, it still has a website. So
you heard it here first, folks. London Fashion Style. So no, that's really great. Thank you so much, Christine. You'll be relieved to hear that there are no questions this afternoon, so you are free from the hot seat.
sorry, Cynthia. If I can just say one last thing as a parting shot. And sorry, as I said, I push boundaries. I think for me, what's important for everyone listening, especially for really ambitious African law firms that want to promote themselves and sell themselves, what I'd like to say is just remember that your competition is not your next door law firm. Because it's very easy to assume that you're competing with the number 1, 2, or 3 in your country. But the biggest realization for me when I was doing this job was that your biggest competition is the international law firms that are working in your country. And so the standards to aim for are not, what the number 1, 2, or 3 in your country are doing, but it's what the international law firms are offering to clients that are in your jurisdiction. And that's what you have to compete with, which is why you always have to push the bar higher and higher, because ultimately the international law firms will enter your market, and at that point there will be your direct competitors. So it's really important to look at it that way. And of course, working with international law firms is a positive. I'm not saying they're the enemies, but we are all fighting for the same pot here. And so when you're setting your standards and looking at what you need to do, that's really where I would set it.
Very important food for thought, and I think that that's a really important place to kind of end the interview, is that it is all about the international marketplace. It isn't just about what's happening domestically, and I do think increasingly firms are picking up on this, but it's important to have it reinforced by a firm like you, and also by you specifically, Christine, given the work that you've done and the experiences that you've had. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been fun and insightful. I've really enjoyed, learning about you and also learning about the work that you do at DLA. I'd like to say a huge congratulations on the first year. We look forward to the next 10 years and, all the great things that you are going to go on to achieve. But thank you so much for being part of today. And thank you to our audience. LGC Pulse is coming to a short pause for the summer, but we will be back in the autumn. We have a number of exciting interviews already lined up, and I'm working to extend our list of guests that will be in the hot seat from September onwards. So please watch this space. Feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Loren Gold, LGC Africa, to be able to catch up on all the interviews that we've done so far. Christine, thank you so much. We will end it there. Thank you
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Cynthia, and thank you for everyone who's tuned in to to this session. And I hope to connect with as many of you as I can in future.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
And thank you.